Well, I don't think Donald Trump's got an intent to carry out an attack on Colombia, because that is a completely different matter to Venezuela and elsewhere. And he hasn't started the build-up. He started his rhetoric against Venezuela, as I said, in his first term, and started it in earnest as he got inaugurated in January 2025. We're not seeing that against Colombia at the moment. However, the Colombian leadership are as guilty as Venezuela with the narco-terrorism side of things, and therefore Trump has set the conditions to use narco-terrorism as a way of interfering in a nation state's activities. Now, Colombia again is different because its leaders have been properly elected and are in place, whereas Maduro in Venezuela had stolen the election. And therefore, with all of these differences, I think what we'll see over the next period of time is Donald Trump increasing his rhetoric against Colombia, increasing the threats, potentially carrying out more tactical operations against Colombian drug cartels, whether that be through special forces, whether it be through black operations, the CIA black operations going in and dealing with things, or whether it be through conventional military activity. I suspect the conventional military activity and support will be the least priority and the least likely. The others will go ahead. But the United States has got a history of interfering in different countries in South America and Central America for decades and decades. So situation no change. But I'd watch out if I was the head of a narco group in Colombia, because you might just disappear, and it might be in a way that can't be directly pinned on the United States. Colombia is coming out with a standard rhetoric that any dictatorship type country, one that's run by people with close relations to criminal gangs, will do anyway. They'll always come out and say they're the strong man. Maduro said he was the strong man. Maduro went to Trump and said, "Come and get me." Donald Trump went and got him, and nothing happened. Colombia does not have the same sort of integrated air defense system that Venezuela had, with Venezuela having some of the most sophisticated radar capabilities from China and Russia, and it was billed as if the Chinese capabilities could see F-35 and F-22 stealth aircraft with ease. Well, they couldn't, and Colombia doesn't have anything similar. So you'll get the rhetoric out of the leadership, but it isn't backed up with any real substance. And you have to recognize that that rhetoric is aimed at the Colombian people first and foremost, at the narco-criminal / narco-terror organizations that are linked to government figures, to those that support Colombia on the international sphere, and looking outwards. And therefore he's trying to get this "I'm a strong man, I'm not scared" message, whereas in reality, he's probably running and trying to find where he can hide. In certain ways, the US is in a position to strike any country in the world that it wants to. America has got the strategic military capability, as we've seen with the very audacious, exceptionally well planned and executed raid in Venezuela. But again, we have to remember the extremely audacious and exceptionally well planned bombing run against the Iranian nuclear facilities, and Iran didn't see them coming in, and therefore, the United States is, I was going to say quietly, but it's not quietly, very noisily sending a very clear message around the world, especially to China and Russia, that your air defense systems, your radars, your intelligence gathering mechanisms don't see what it is that we're coming to do. And therefore we can come and do it. And America can hit any part of the planet at any time at relatively short notice. If America took greater control in some of the Central and South American countries, could it control the cartels more? In a word, no. And that's why I don't think America is going to take greater control. If we look at history, America does not have a good history of being able to control what's going on in different countries whenever it comes in to take it over. Look at Iraq and how that fell apart. Look at Afghanistan and how that fell apart. Look at other American incursions into Central and South America in the past, and it hasn't gone well for the United States. So the last thing that the United States military will want to do is get fixed on the ground and trying to police and deal with all the different groups that are there, but far rather set the conditions for local forces to have the wherewithal to deal with that, with the local understanding and everything else. That's the challenge. The challenge for America in Venezuela, and the challenge for America, if it decides to do anything in Colombia, is not the initial operation. It's what comes after. And we've seen no evidence of what's coming after yet. And we've seen Donald Trump say in Venezuela that he would take control of it. Well, he hasn't. The vice president has been sworn in as the leader of Colombia, and the army has sworn allegiance to her. And one of her first statements was to condemn the United States for kidnapping Maduro and call for his release. There's a lot more to play for. I don't think we'll see other South American countries wanting to back Venezuela or Colombia. I think they'll want to distance themselves from them because they've been suffering from the terror organizations and the narco criminal organizations that have been operating out of there. And if anything, the only other South American country that's come out with any public statement is Argentina, and that's supporting the United States. So the US knows it's on fairly secure ground from these tactical perspectives. The last thing that Donald Trump will want to do is get fixed in the country and starting to run a country in a way that will distract him from what he's trying to do from a wider geopolitical perspective. Interestingly, I think Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin will want him to get fixed in there. So there's a lot to play out in the coming days, weeks and months. Venezuela and Greenland are two completely different issues. So it's not even like comparing apples and pears. It's like you're comparing a stone to a fruit. Greenland is something that Donald Trump can put whatever military forces he wants into now, as per an agreement. It's part of Danish interests, it's part of NATO, and there are mechanisms in place to get, even if there wasn't the 1951 treaty, there's mechanisms in place for NATO countries to agree to deploy each other's troops on each other's territories. So Greenland's a bit of a red herring. Whereas Venezuela has been building for a number of years. Donald Trump started his rhetoric against Venezuela during his first term. He really launched into it just as he got inaugurated in January 2025, when he declared some of the groups operating out of Venezuela as narco-terrorist groups. And he's using that, and has used that as his excuse to get Maduro, the president of Venezuela, who has not been recognized as being the legitimate president of Venezuela ever since the last presidential elections, because effectively he stole it. He lost the election to the opposition and didn't let the opposition take over. So he hasn't been recognized not just by the United States, but by many European countries and other countries around the world. And therefore, the United States sees him as an illegitimate president. They see him as heading one of the narco-terrorist groups that there is. We've seen the rhetoric building up over the whole of 2025 that those narco-terrorist groups have been attacking the United States with their drugs and importing their terrorist doctrine into the United States, and therefore seen as an existential threat to the United States. And therefore the United States is interpreting that under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which allows a country to protect itself and protect its sovereign interests by attacking another country that's attacking it.